I hate to do this to myself again, but let's flash back to my preseason predictions. The AL Central is pretty cut and dry. The White Sox were the best team last year, and they've only gotten better, especially in their bullpen. Not only do they win the Central once again, they're going to be the top team in the AL. For the ALCS, I have the White Sox over the Mariners. This sets up a showdown between the Mets and the White Sox in the World Series. I know, I went out on a limb when I said the Braves would miss the playoffs, but saying the White Sox were going to win the Central and be the top team in the AL was not a crazy pick. The White Sox started showing some promise in 2019 with some very young talent. They signed Yasmani Grandal and Dallas Keuchel, and their offense went from 13th in the American League all the way up to 2nd. The pitching went from 9th to 5th. In the short season, they were 10 games over 500 and made the playoffs for the first time in 12 years. Despite their good season, the team fired manager Rick Renteria and then dragged Tony La Russa out of retirement. At this point, he was 10 years removed from his last gig with the Cardinals. The team had high hopes for 2021 and they paid off, finishing with 93 wins and winning the AL Central by 13 games. They signed Lance Lynn and Liam Hendriks and they were phenomenal, and Carlos Rodon had a breakout year. All three of those guys had a top 8 Cy Young finish. The White Sox pitching as a whole went all the way up to number 2 in the league. They lost the ALDS to the Astros in 4, but this was obviously a team on the rise. That's why I thought the White Sox were the most stacked and ready team to make a run in 2022. But here we are, looking at a 500 team that couldn't even take a wildcard spot. This has been one of the biggest failures of a season in recent memory. So, what happened? There was a big blow to their number 2 pitching staff before the season even started. Carlos Rodon was an unrestricted free agent, and he signed a 2-year, $44 million contract with the Giants. They would replace him with a player coming from the Giants, almost a de facto trade, that being 36-year-old Johnny Cueto on a 1-year, $4.2 million contract. He was coming off his best season since 2016, so there was some hope for him. Turns out, he was worth the money. 24 starts, 158 and a third innings, 8-10 record, but with an awesome 3.35 ERA. Rodon was better. 14-8, 178 innings and a 2.88 ERA. But for a fraction of the price, the White Sox got some good production. Dallas Keuchel had the worst season of his career in 2021 with a 5.28 ERA, and 2022 was even worse. After 8 starts, the White Sox cut him with a 7.88 ERA, his last outing only lasting 2 innings and giving up 6 runs against Boston. But they had another starter to fill his shoes. They gave Michael Kopech the ball as a full-time starter for the first time in his career. He got the job done. 25 starts, 119 and a third innings, only 5-9, but had a very good 3.54 ERA. One of the big moves the team made to win the 2021 World Series was trading for Craig Kimbrel. In his first half with the Cubs that year, he gave up 2 earned runs in 36 2/3 innings. That's a 0.49 ERA, but he lost it somewhere between the north side and the south side. He gave up 13 earned runs in just 23 innings, a 5.09 ERA. It was no shock the White Sox had no problem trading him to the Dodgers before the season, getting the veteran outfielder A.J. Pollock in return. Kimbrel had a rocky season out west, saving 22 games with a 3.75 ERA, losing his closer role late in the season and being left off the playoff roster. The White Sox may have dodged a bullet there, but Pollock had the worst season of his career, hitting .245, 14 homers, and a 681 OPS with a 91 OPS+. Without Kimbrel, the White Sox were still well covered in the bullpen. In addition to the elite closer Hendriks, they also signed Kendall Graveman and Joe Kelly, a pair of electric and veteran arms. This is another reason I was so high on the White Sox. They kept adding pieces that made the team better. They started off on a good note. After April 16th, they were 6-2, but they were immediately tested on the road against their 2 biggest division challengers, and they failed that test. They got swept in Cleveland and Minnesota, scoring 12 runs over those 6 games. That's 2 runs a game, outscored 12-36 in total. They'd finish April 8-12, and they'd be fighting to get back to 500 all the way through the All-Star break and beyond. Lucky for them, the AL Central didn't have a runaway champ like the East and the West, so when they swept the Tigers and took the first 2 from Houston in mid-August, they were suddenly 5 games over 500 and 1 game out of first. But over their next 12 games, they would lose 10 of them, and suddenly they were 6 games out. They were very streaky in September, running off 2 4-game winning streaks and only down a game and a half on September 10th. But that's when the Guardians got hot and the White Sox made their final collapse, losing 3 home games at Cleveland that put them 7 games back. This was the start of an 8-game losing streak, and that was the final nail in the White Sox coffin. They would rally to win 5 of the last 7 to climb back to 500. The way their season went, it was appropriate their final record was 81-81. They finished with 12 fewer wins from 2021. Question is, why? Let's look at their most basic stats first. They scored 110 fewer runs from last year. 686 versus 796. That was only good for 9th place after finishing 5th last year. The team ERA jumped from 373 to 392. It doesn't seem like much, but that dropped them from number 2 in the league to number 8. The bullpen was just about even, but the starters' ERA was up about a third of a run. One other note, they were 8th place in ERA, but they were 11th place in runs allowed. They allowed 86 unearned runs. That was the worst in the American League, second to worst in all of baseball, just behind the Cubs. The Cardinals topped that list with only 32 unearned runs allowed. Nobody in the league committed more errors than the White Sox at 102, though they weren't all that good last year with 97 errors, and that was 12th. But last year, it didn't cost them that much. They only gave up 55 unearned runs. That was 6th in the league and 11th overall. Now, let's look at the players themselves. There were some positives on offense, like Andrew Vaughn. He came up the bat almost 100 more times this year, and he raised his average 36 points, OPS 45 points, had an OPS well over 100, hit a couple more homers and drove in 28 more runs. Eloy Jimenez also had a much better year, hitting almost 300 with an OPS of 858 and an OPS plus of 140. The only problem was he only played in 84 games. That's pretty much all the good things that I have to say about this offense. Well, Jose Abreu did raise his average 43 points and hit over 300, but he had a major power outage. His home run total was cut in half and he drove in 42 fewer runs, so even though his average was better, his OPS fell 7 points. Tim Anderson also hit over 300, a bit down from last year, but he only played in 79 games and hit 6 homers, his OPS falling 72 points. Luis Robert only played in 98 games, but that was 30 more than last year, but his 13 homers last year were still 1 more than this year. He had a really good 68-game stretch last year, and this year it was all down, including a 200-point drop in OPS. Lurie Garcia's OPS was also down over 200 points, seeing the field in 29 fewer games. Yoan Moncada played in just 104 games, and he still has his home run stroke, but his average dropped 51 points, OPS 161 points, and he fell well below league average with an OPS plus of 76. I was saving the worst for last, and that's Yasmani Grandal. In terms of playing time, it was almost identical to last year. 93 games versus 99, 375 plate appearances versus 376. His production fell off in a shocking way. 23 homers down to 5, 62 RBI down to 27. His average wasn't great last year, but it still dropped 38 points. But he had an amazing OPS and OPS plus of 939 and 155. This year, it was 570 and 64. That's a 369-point drop in OPS and a 91-point drop in OPS plus. The two players they picked up over the offseason didn't help either. Josh Harrison and AJ Pollock finished below league average with an OPS under 700. On the pitching side, again, there were some positives. Obviously, I'm talking about Dylan Cease. He'll probably end up number 2 in the AL Cy Young vote behind Justin Verlander. 32 starts, 184 innings, 14-8 with a 2.20 ERA and a 1.80 ERA plus, striking out 227 batters. This made up for some of their other reliable starters not getting the job done. Lucas Giolito's ERA went from 3.53 to 4.90, the ERA plus dropping from 1.24 to 81. Lance Lynn was almost a Cy Young winner last year, but his ERA spiked almost as much as Giolito's, finishing just shy of 4, and he went from an elite ace down to just below league average. In the bullpen, Jose Ruiz was a reliable arm last year, but this year his ERA climbed more than a run and a half. There was more good news coming out of the pen. Matt Foster, Jimmy Lambert, and Reynaldo Lopez all seeing more work and performing well. Aaron Bummer was good in his 32 innings also, but that was way down from last year. Kendall Graven was a big-time free agent pickup and he was good also, a 3.18 ERA over 65 innings, but their other big free agent was a big flop. Joe Kelly only threw 37 innings and had a 6.08 ERA. Vince Velasquez started some games, but he was mainly a bullpen arm, and he finished up at 4.78. When they traded for Jake Diekman from Boston, he appeared in 26 games and had an ERA of over 6.5. They really could have used Garrett Crochet out of the pen this year. He had an ERA under 3 in his first full season, but he went down for Tommy John. With Craig Kimbrell gone, the end of the game belonged to Liam Hendriks and he was good. His ERA was up a bit, but he was not the problem. In 11 fewer games, he picked up just 1 less save from last year. Truth is, the White Sox were very good in one-run games this year, 27 and 16 compared to 18 and 24 last year. In the end, this was not a terrible team. They were perfectly average, but given that roster, this was a giant fail of a season. With a better performance from either Giolito or Lance Lynn, or if they played a little better defense, or if they could have just avoided just about all their best hitters having their worst seasons, this season would have had a different ending. It was frustrating from start to finish. A team with so much talent, a team with so much promise, struggling so much to keep their head above 500. Tony La Russa was away from the team for the last month of the year because of a health issue, and by the end, he said he's stepping down. We'll see who they hire. As of the time I'm writing this, they were planning on talking to Ozzie Guillen. Now that's a blast from the past. We'll see what moves they make. Jose Abreu is a free agent. The team has a club option for Tim Anderson for the next 2 years if they choose, but he said he wants to stay with the team for the rest of his career. Cueto, Velasquez, Pollock, they all might walk. They still seem to be in good shape to be contenders next year. They just have to simply, play better. That's all I have for the White Sox. Let me know if you have any thoughts on the team or anything to add. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like. And if you're new here, please give me a sub for more content just like this. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.